The summons. The crystalline spire of the Galactic Council tower pierced the violet sky of Nexum Prime like a shard of frozen starlight. For 3,000 years, it had stood as the ultimate symbol of civilized power in the galaxy, a place where empires spoke and lesser species listened. Ambassador Kale Vorshin had never expected to see it. He stood at the observation window of the human diplomatic vessel Perseverance, watching the tower grow larger as they approached. His reflection stared back, a man in his 40s with gray threading through dark hair, eyes that had seen too many negotiation tables, and a jaw set with determination born from decades of being dismissed. "Ambassador, we're receiving final docking clearance," Captain Raina Moss announced from behind him. Her voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone who'd spent 20 years navigating both space and bureaucracy. Kale turned to face his small team. Besides Raina, there was Dr. Elian Thrace, their xenobiologist and cultural specialist, who looked like he might vibrate out of his skin with excitement. And there was Zara Quinn, their security chief, whose stillness suggested coiled springs rather than calm. "Remember," Kale said, his voice steady despite the weight of what lay ahead. "We weren't invited to speak. We were summoned to listen. The Vorathian Empire wants to formalize the Outer Rim Treaty, the one that designates Earth and 17 other human colonies as protected developmental zones." "Protected," Zara muttered, her hand unconsciously touching her sidearm. "That's a pretty word for quarantine." Elian adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit. "The translation algorithms suggest protective custody might be more accurate. We're being preserved like specimens." Kale nodded grimly. The Vorathians were the galaxy's preeminent empire, a species that had mastered faster-than-light travel when humanity was still painting on cave walls. They discovered Earth 43 years ago, studied humans with the detached interest of anthropologists observing primitive tribes, and then drawn a line in space around human territory. Don't expand beyond these borders. Don't interfere with galactic affairs. Stay small, stay quiet, stay irrelevant. For 4 decades, humanity had complied. They'd had no choice. But compliance bred resentment, and resentment bred something the Vorathians hadn't anticipated: determination. The docking procedure was flawlessly executed by automated systems far beyond human engineering. As they disembarked, Kale felt the weight of eyes upon them, not physical eyes, but the sensors and surveillance systems that monitored every molecule of air in the station. Their escort was waiting, a Vorathian official named Silex Thrander. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with the deep blue of nobility, for arms folded in a configuration that Elian had once explained meant patient condescension. "Humans," Silex said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, emotionless English. "You will follow. You will observe the proceedings. You will not speak unless addressed directly by a council chair. Is this understood?" "Perfectly," Kale replied, meeting the alien's compound eyes without flinching. They were led through corridors that seemed to shift and breathe, made from materials that humanity couldn't yet synthesize. Other species passed them, the gaseous Ventari in their containment suits, the crystalline Zixri whose bodies sang with harmonic frequencies, the massive Durnok who had to duck through doorways built for smaller races. Each one glanced at the humans with the same expression, or whatever passed for expression in their physiology: curiosity, pity, dismissal. The council chamber was vast enough to swallow starships. Tiered seating rose in concentric circles around a central platform where representatives could address the assembly. The ceiling displayed a real-time map of the galaxy, with territorial boundaries marked in various colors. Human space was a tiny gray bubble in one corner, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Silex directed them to a small observation gallery, more balcony than seating area, far from the main floor. "You will remain here," he instructed. Silent and still. As Silex departed, Zara leaned close to Kale. "We're literally in the cheap seats." "At least we're in the room," Kale replied, though his stomach tightened. The council began assembling. Kale recognized the major powers from his briefings: the Vorathian Empress Naratha, whose presence commanded the chamber like gravity commands orbits; the Keltharn Trade Consortium, whose 3 representative minds shared a single body; the warrior poets of Dravos, whose culture valued battle and verse equally; the Luminarchs of Sela, beings of pure energy who'd evolved beyond physical form. 57 species. 3,000 years of established hierarchy. And humans, barely noticed in their corner, waiting to hear their fate codified into galactic law. The proceedings opened with ritual and formality that would have made Earth's most elaborate ceremonies seem rushed. Finally, after nearly an hour, the Varathian Empress rose to address the assembly. "We gather to formalize the Outer Rim Treaty." Her voice resonated through the chamber, translated simultaneously into 57 languages. "Certain species require guidance. Certain territories require boundaries. Today we shall establish these permanently, ensuring stability and order in the galaxy's frontier regions." Kale's hands gripped the railing. This was it. Humanity's future being decided by those who'd never bothered to truly understand them. But as the Empress continued speaking, outlining restrictions that would bind humanity for generations, Kale felt something unexpected. Not resignation. Not acceptance. A spark. Because someone had forgotten something crucial about humans, they were very, very good at listening. And even better at learning what not to do. The weight of words. The Varathian Empress's proposal scrolled across holographic displays throughout the chamber, each line a chain forged from bureaucratic language. Kale forced himself to read every word, committing each restriction to memory. Human vessels shall not exceed warp factor 3. Human colonies shall not be established beyond the designated protected zone without council approval. Human technology development shall be monitored to ensure galactic security. Humans shall not participate in Galactic Council proceedings except when directly summoned. The last one stung most of all. They were being written out of the conversation before it even began. Elian was furiously taking notes on his datapad, his fingers flying across the screen. Zara stood motionless, but Kale could see the muscle working in her jaw. Reyna, ever the pragmatist, watched the proceedings with the analytical gaze of someone calculating odds. "This is absurd," Elian whispered, barely audible. "We've made more progress in 40 years than some of these species made in centuries. The Keltharn didn't even develop FTL, they inherited it from a dead civilization." "Quiet," Kale murmured, though he shared the sentiment. The Empress concluded her presentation and opened the floor for discussion. What followed was a masterclass in political theater. The Dravos representatives spoke in verse about the necessity of protecting untempered flames. The Keltharn emphasized economic stability and the dangers of unpredictable market entrance. The Luminarchs of Sela spoke philosophically about the burden of guidance. Not once did anyone ask what humans thought. Not once did anyone acknowledge that Earth had produced Shakespeare and Einstein, that humanity had survived world wars and diseases, that they'd reached for the stars with nothing but chemical rockets and stubborn hope. Then a new voice cut through the chamber, sharp as a blade. "I must speak against this treaty." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembly. Kale leaned forward, trying to see who had spoken. The voice came from a section he hadn't been briefed on, a smaller delegation in deep shadow. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Nixera of the Salanth Confederacy," the Empress said, her tone carrying a note of displeasure. A figure emerged into the light and Kale felt his breath catch. The Salanth were a rare sight at Council, a species that kept to themselves, neither empire nor puppet. Nixera moved with fluid grace, her scaled skin shifting through colors like an aurora, her 6 eyes arranged in a pattern that suggested she could perceive things others couldn't. "The Varathian proposal is flawed," Nixera continued, her voice melodious but firm. "Not in its legality but in its assumptions." "Explain," the Empress commanded, her posture radiating controlled irritation. "You propose to restrict humans because you fear them. This fear you dress in words like protection and guidance, but fear is the foundation nonetheless." Nixera's colors shifted to deep crimson. "I have studied these humans. Yes, they are aggressive. Yes, they are unpredictable. But these same traits drove them from their caves to their stars in an evolutionary instant. You do not fear what they are. You fear what they might become." A murmur swept through the chamber. Kale's heart hammered against his ribs. Someone was defending humanity at the Galactic Council. Someone understood. A Dravos representative stood, their armor gleaming. The Salanth speak poetry but ignore reality. Humans have demonstrated violent tendencies throughout their history. Their own planet bears the scars of their conflicts. Would you unleash such chaos upon the galaxy? "I would unleash nothing," Nixera replied calmly. "I would simply allow them to choose their own path as every species here was allowed." "The species here earned their place through millennia of development," the Empress interjected. "Humans are infants by comparison. This treaty protects them as much as it protects us." Nixera's colors flickered. Elian had told Kale this meant amusement. Infants? They discovered the quantum fold principle independently. Their mathematical theories on dark matter have proven more accurate than our own. Their art, she paused, and when she continued, her voice carried genuine wonder, Their art captures emotions we didn't know had names. Art does not build starships, a Keltharn representative chimed in, its three minds speaking in unsettling unison. Economic disruption could destabilize trade routes that have existed for centuries. The human approach to commerce is chaotic, unpredictable. We must have order. Order, Nixera said, or stagnation. When did this council become an instrument of fear rather than cooperation? When did we decide that difference was dangerous? Cale found himself gripping the railing so hard his knuckles whitened. He'd spent weeks preparing for this meeting, crafting speeches he'd never get to give, preparing arguments he'd never get to voice. But Nixera was saying everything he'd wanted to say, with an authority he could never possess. The Salenth position is noted, the Empress said coldly. But we must consider practical reality. The treaty will proceed to vote. As Nixera returned to her seat, her eyes, all six of them, found Cale across the vast chamber. For a moment their gazes locked. Then she did something that made Elian gasp beside him. She bowed. Not the formal bow of diplomatic courtesy but a bow of respect. Of recognition. As if to say, I see you. I hear you. Even if they don't. Cale felt something shift inside him. They might be in the cheap seats, voiceless and powerless. But they were being seen. And sometimes that was where revolutions began. The unexpected advocate. The vote was scheduled for the following day, giving delegates time to consult and consider. Though everyone knew the outcome was predetermined. The Varathian Empire held too much influence, controlled too many trade routes, commanded too much respect. The Outer Rim Treaty would pass and humanity would remain caged. Cale couldn't sleep. He paced his quarters aboard the Perseverance, replaying the session in his mind. At 0300 station time, his comm unit chimed with an incoming message. The ID was scrambled, but the encryption signature bore Salenth markers. Ambassador Vorshin. We should speak. Private. Coordinates attached. Come alone, but I understand if your security protocols forbid this. Zara would have a fit if he went alone. Cale called her anyway. Absolutely not, she said immediately when he explained. We don't know this Nixera. Could be a trap, could be intelligence gathering, could be our only ally, Cale interrupted. Did you see what she did today? She was the only voice speaking for us. Zara's expression softened slightly. Fine. But I'm coming with you, staying out of sight. And if anything feels wrong, we extract immediately. The coordinates led to an observation deck in the station's civilian quarter, a place where different species could mingle away from political theater. When Cale arrived, he found Nixera standing before a massive viewport, her scales reflecting the nebula beyond in shimmering patterns. You came, she said without turning. I wasn't certain you would. Humans and trust, from what I understand, it's complicated. So is politics, Cale replied, approaching cautiously. Thank you for what you said today. No one has spoken for us like that before. I spoke truth, not advocacy. Nixera finally turned to face him, her six eyes studying him with unnerving intensity. Though I admit, my interest is not purely philosophical. Cale tensed. What do you mean? The Salenth Confederacy is small by galactic standards. We have 3 star systems, modest resources and little political power. We maintain independence through neutrality and by being too insignificant to bother conquering. Her colors shifted to deep blue. But we are not blind. We see the galaxy calcifying, becoming rigid. The great empires like Varathia grow comfortable, unchallenged. When empires grow comfortable, they grow cruel. She gestured to the viewport, to the vast expanse of stars. Your species appeared 43 years ago. In that time, you've accomplished what takes others centuries. You did this not because you're superior, but because you're desperate. Desperate to prove yourselves, desperate to survive, desperate to matter. Desperation breeds innovation. And you think the galaxy needs innovation? Cale asked. I think the galaxy needs disruption, Nixera corrected. Controlled, intelligent disruption. The kind that prevents stagnation from becoming tyranny. Cale studied her carefully. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? I want you to speak tomorrow. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Cale blinked. I'm not allowed to speak. We're observers only. You're allowed if a council member yields their floor time to you. Which I will do. Nixera's colors flickered through a rapid sequence. Amusement, determination, something that might have been hope. The treaty will pass. This is inevitable. But how it passes, what message humanity sends in this chamber, that can change everything. I don't understand, Cale said, though his mind was already racing. The vote will be recorded in the Galactic Archives, accessible to all species for all time. Today humanity was spoken about. Tomorrow humanity could speak for itself. Even in defeat you could show the galaxy who you really are. She paused. And that, ambassador, might matter more than any vote. Kale felt his pulse quicken. The Varathians will be furious if you yield your time to me. Let them be furious. The Solinth don't answer to Varathia. Nyxra moved closer, her presence both alien and oddly comforting. I've watched your species broadcast, studied your history, read your literature. You have something most galaxy species lost millennia ago. You still believe change is possible. You still fight for it. That belief is either naive or precious, and I've decided it's precious. Why? Kale asked quietly. Why risk your neutrality for us? Nyxra's colors softened to gentle lavender. Because 3,000 years ago the Solinth were where you are now. We were the newcomers, the primitives, the ones who didn't belong. And an elder species called the Mithrin spoke for us when no one else would. They're extinct now, scattered to the cosmic dust, but I remember the stories. I remember that someone cared enough to speak. Her eyes met his, all 6 of them. Consider this a debt paid forward. Kale felt something unlock in his chest. I'll need time to prepare. What I say could help humanity or damn us further. You have 12 hours, Nyxra said. I suggest you use them wisely. She began to walk away, then paused. Ambassador? One more thing. Don't try to appease them. Don't try to make them comfortable. Speak your truth, whatever that is. The galaxy has enough comfortable lies. After she left, Kale stood alone at the viewport, staring at the stars. Zara emerged from her concealment, her expression unreadable. Well, she said. Guess you'd better write one hell of a speech. Kale nodded, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Somewhere beyond that viewport was Earth. Oh. Billions of people who would never know that tomorrow, in a chamber filled with beings who considered them irrelevant, their story would finally be told. He just had to figure out what story to tell. The speech that echoed. Kale didn't write the speech alone. He couldn't. This wasn't just his moment, it belonged to every human who'd ever looked up at the stars and wondered. Back aboard the Perseverance, his team gathered in the conference room. Reyna brought coffee, earth-grown beans that had traveled light years to be here. Elian spread his research across multiple displays, cultural analyses, historical parallels, linguistic studies. Zara sat quiet, listening, her tactical mind processing everything. We can't apologize for being human, Kale said, pacing. That's where we start. No apologies. But we can't be aggressive either, Elian cautioned. These species respond to calculated presentations, logical frameworks, structured arguments. Screw their frameworks, Zara said suddenly. Everyone turned to her. She rarely spoke in these sessions, but when she did, it mattered. Sorry, but it's true. We've been playing by their rules since first contact, and where has it gotten us? Quarantined. You want to change minds tomorrow? Don't give them what they expect. She's right, Reyna agreed. Every species in that chamber will expect us to be deferential, to plead our case, to promise we'll be good little humans and stay in our corner. What if we don't? Kale stopped pacing. What are you suggesting? Tell them what we've accomplished. Not to brag, but to demonstrate what 43 years of human determination looks like. Reyna pulled up a file. In the time since first contact, we've established 17 colonies. We've developed technologies the Varathians said we wouldn't understand for another century. We've solved mathematical problems that stumped civilizations twice our age. And we've done it with our hands tied, Zara added. Under constant surveillance with limited resources, while they watched us like lab rats. Elian nodded excitedly. There's precedent for this approach. The Drakkar Uprising of 2341, 2341 by Galactic Standard Calendar, when a restricted species challenged their limitations through demonstration rather than pleading. How did that end? Kale asked. They earned a council seat, Elian said. 50 years later, but they earned it. Kale looked at his team, these 3 people who'd traveled impossible distances to stand beside him. All right. We don't apologize. We don't plead. We show them who we are, what we've done, and we let them decide if that's something to fear or something to respect. They worked through the night. Kale drafted and redrafted, finding the balance between pride and humility, between defiance and diplomacy. At 0600 he finally had something that felt true. By the time they entered the council chamber for the second day of proceedings, Kale's exhaustion had transformed into something sharper, clarity. Nyxra had already informed the session chairs of her intention to yield floor time. The Varathian Empress's displeasure was evident in the rigid set of her carapace, but she couldn't object without revealing her fear of what a human might say. The council recognizes Ambassador Nixera of the Solanth Confederacy, the session chair announced. Nixera rose gracefully. I yield my time to Ambassador Kale Vorshin of Earth. The chamber erupted in chittering, humming, and various sounds of surprise. Kale felt every eye, every sensor, every awareness in that vast space turned toward their small observation gallery. That is highly irregular, the Empress protested. But not illegal, Nixera countered smoothly. The charter permits yielding of floor time. I invoke that right. The session chair consulted with advisors, then nodded reluctantly. The human may speak. 5 minutes standard time. Kale descended from their gallery, each step feeling like walking through history. He'd never been more aware of being human, of his limited lifespan, his fragile biology, his species' brief existence in cosmic terms. He reached the central platform. The galaxy waited. Honorable council members, he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I thank Ambassador Nixera for this opportunity, and I'll be brief. I know many of you consider humans primitive, dangerous, unpredictable. You're not wrong. We are all of those things. But I'd ask you to consider what else we are. He activated the holographic display he'd prepared, Earth rotating slowly above the platform. This is our home. One planet. We appeared on it roughly 200,000 years ago. For most of that time we struggled to survive. We fought predators with sticks. We died from infections you've cured for millennia. We watched our children starve. But we kept going. Not because we were strong, but because we refused to accept that our story ended there. The display shifted, showing humanity's timeline compressed impossibly small compared to the species around him. You've had thousands of years to build your empires. We've had decades. You developed faster than light travel across centuries of gradual progress. We went from our first powered flight to walking on our moon in 66 years. From our moon to your council chamber in another 60. Recklessness, a Keltharn representative muttered. Determination, Kale corrected. There's a difference. Yes, we move fast. Yes, we make mistakes. But we also learn, adapt, and improve at a rate that terrifies you. And I understand that fear. I do. But let me ask you something. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact where possible, meeting incomprehensible alien gazes with human directness. When did fear become wisdom? When did caution become an excuse for chains? The chamber went silent. The truth unbound. Kale let the question hang in the air, watching it ripple through the assembled delegates. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others remained still, but he could sense their attention sharpening. You want to formalize our restrictions because you fear humanity will disrupt the galactic order? He continued, his voice gaining strength. And you're absolutely right to think that. Because we will. Not through violence or chaos, but through something you've forgotten how to do. We ask, why? The holographic display shifted again, showing images from human history, scientists in laboratories, artists at canvases, engineers at drafting tables, children looking through telescopes. When the Varathians arrived at Earth, they studied us. They documented our wars, our pollution, our conflicts. They saw all our flaws and none of our potential. Do you know what they missed? Kale paused, looking directly at the Empress. They missed that the same species that built weapons also built hospitals. The same hands that destroyed also healed. The same minds that created conflict also composed symphonies, painted masterpieces, and wrote poetry that made others weep. We are not one thing. We are all things, constantly in conversation with ourselves about who we want to be. Pretty words, a Dravos representative called out. But what of your violence? Your wars? What of yours? Kale shot back and a surprised murmur went through the chamber. I've read the histories available to us. The Dravos expansion wars claimed billions. The Keltharn trade conflicts destroyed entire economies. The Varathian unity campaigns, he met the Empress's gaze directly, your own archives call them campaigns, but the species absorbed into your empire might use different words. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. My point, Kale said, softening his tone slightly, is not to condemn. It's to contextualize. Every species here has blood in their past. The difference is you had time to make those mistakes in private, to grow beyond them before joining this council. We're being judged for crimes we're still learning not to commit. Elian had been right about the Drakkar precedent. Kale could see it working, not winning hearts but creating cognitive dissonance, making them question their assumptions. You call the protected zone a safeguard, Kale continued. But let me tell you what it really is. It's a cage that gets smaller every year as our population grows. It's a ceiling that lowers every time one of our scientists makes a breakthrough you didn't anticipate. It's a message to every human child who looks up at the stars: you don't belong out here. His voice grew harder. But here's what you don't understand about humans. Tell us we can't do something and we become obsessed with proving you wrong. Tell us we're not allowed and we ask who gave you the right to decide. Tell us to be quiet and we learn to speak louder. Is this a threat? The Empress asked, her voice cold. No, Kale said. It's a promise. And there's a difference. We're not threatening violence or rebellion. We're promising that we will continue to grow, to learn, to reach for more. You can formalize these restrictions, pass this treaty, lock down our borders. And for a time it will work. But eventually we'll find ways around it. Not because we're criminals, but because restriction breeds innovation. Always has. Always will. He changed the display again, showing humanity's achievements since first contact. The quantum fold breakthrough, the dark matter equations, the cultural works that even some council species had begun to appreciate. In 43 years we've accomplished this. Imagine what we could do in 400. In 4,000. If you make us your enemies through isolation, that potential becomes opposition. But if you make us partners, even junior partners, that potential becomes cooperation. Nixra's colors had shifted to bright gold, which Elian had said meant approval. But most of the chamber remained skeptical at best, hostile at worst. A luminarch of Sela finally spoke, their translated voice like wind chimes. You speak of partnership, but partnership requires trust. Why should we trust a species so young, so volatile? You shouldn't, Kale admitted, and the honesty seemed to surprise them. Not completely. Not yet. Trust is earned and we haven't had enough time to earn yours. But we're asking for the opportunity to try. That's all. Don't lock us away from the galaxy because of what you fear we might become. Give us the chance to show you what we actually are. He took a breath, coming to his conclusion. The Outer Rim Treaty will probably pass today. I'm not naive enough to think one speech changes 3,000 years of precedent. But I want this on record, in your archives, for future generations to see. Humanity asked for a chance. We asked to be judged on our actions, not your fears. We asked to be partners in building whatever comes next for this galaxy. Kale's voice dropped, but somehow it carried through the vast chamber. And if you say no, if you formalize these chains, just remember, you didn't tame humanity. You just taught us patience. He returned to his seat in silence. Zara's hand found his shoulder and squeezed. Reyna nodded with quiet respect. Elian was already analyzing reactions throughout the chamber. The vote would come soon. But for the first time in 43 years, humanity had spoken in its own voice. And the galaxy had listened. The fracture. The vote was called within the hour. Standard procedure. Speeches delivered, positions stated, time to formalize what everyone already knew would happen. Kale watched from their gallery as representatives activated their voting crystals, each one glowing as decisions were registered. Green for approval. Red for opposition. White for abstention. The chamber filled with green light like a toxic sunrise. But then, something unexpected. The Solent crystal glowed red. No surprise there, Nixra had made her position clear. But then another red light appeared. And another. The Mythikos Collective, a minor species Kale barely recognized. The free territories of Vandros. The Shurian republics. Not enough to stop the treaty. Not even close. But enough to mean something. The final tally appeared on the central display. 47 in favor, 8 opposed, 2 abstentions. The Outer Rim Treaty was now galactic law. The matter is settled, the Empress announced, satisfaction evident in her tone. The protected developmental zones are hereby formalized, with all restrictions and monitoring protocols. A moment, if I may. The voice came from a section of the chamber Kale hadn't paid much attention to, the Academic Observers Gallery, where representatives from various research institutions watched proceedings. An elderly Varathian stepped forward, their carapace marked with the silver sigils of someone who'd earned the right to speak. The council recognizes Scholar Primary Terthanax of the Varathian Historical Archives, the session chair said, clearly confused. Scholars rarely spoke during political proceedings. Terthanax moved with the careful deliberation of age. I invoke the right of historical context, as is my privilege under the academic charter. The Empress's posture shifted subtly, the Varathian equivalent of a grimace. The right of historical context was an ancient tradition, one that couldn't be denied without causing offense to every academic institution in the galaxy. Proceed, the Empress said tightly. I have been the keeper of historical records for 73 years, Tirthanax began. In that time I have witnessed 17 treaties similar to this one. Do you know how many of those species are still restricted today? Silence. 0, Tirthanax said. Because they either earned their freedom through exceptional contribution, or they disappeared from relevance entirely, their potential suffocated by limitation. Of those 17, 12 are now considered extinct, culturally if not biologically. They exist but they do not matter. Kale leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. I watched the human ambassador speak today, and I was reminded of something we found in the archives recently. Records from when the Varathian Empire itself was young, when we were petitioning the ancient Morphean hegemony for recognition. Tirthanax activated a display showing text in an ancient script. This is what the Morphean Emperor said about us 3,000 years ago. The Varathians are aggressive, unpredictable, and dangerously ambitious. They must be contained for the good of galactic stability. The chamber went absolutely still. The Morpheans contained us, Tirthanax continued. For 200 years they restricted our expansion, monitored our technology, treated us as children who couldn't be trusted. And do you know what happened? He looked around the chamber, his compound eyes glinting. We became everything they feared. Not because of our nature but because of our treatment. Restriction bred resentment. Resentment bred rebellion. And when we finally broke free, we did so with such violence that the Morphean hegemony collapsed within a decade. The Empress stood. Scholar primary, you overstep. I state historical fact, Tirthanax interrupted, which Kale had learned was a serious breach of etiquette. The Morpheans are dust now. We are here. And we have become what they were, comfortable in power, comfortable making decisions for others, comfortable ignoring the lessons of our own history. He turned to face the human gallery directly. Ambassador Vorshin spoke of asking why. Let me ask why on his behalf. Why do we repeat the same mistakes? Why do we become the thing we once fought against? Why do we treat newcomers with the same arrogance that nearly destroyed us? This council has heard enough philosophy, the Empress said coldly. The vote has concluded. The treaty stands. The treaty stands, Tirthanax agreed. But let the record show, let the archives reflect, that the Varathian historical institution formally objects to this course of action. Not on legal grounds but on historical precedent. We are making the same mistake the Morpheans made with us. And we will reap the same consequences. He bowed formally to the council, then did something that made several delegates gasp. He turned and bowed to Kale, the gesture of respect between equals. The human said his people will learn patience, Tirthanax said. I suspect they will. And I suspect we will live to regret teaching them this lesson. He departed the chamber, leaving shocked silence in his wake. The session chair seemed flustered. The proceedings are concluded. The Outer Rim Treaty is now galactic law. This session is adjourned. As delegates began to file out, Kale sat stunned. They'd lost the vote. Humanity was now officially restricted for the foreseeable future. But something else had happened, something he couldn't quite name yet. Did we just witness the Varathian Empire fracture? Elian whispered. Reyna shook her head slowly. No. We witnessed the first crack. The fracture comes later. Nixera appeared at their gallery, her colors swirling with complex emotions. That was unexpected. Scholar Tirthanax is highly respected, considered the moral voice of Varathian academia. For him to publicly oppose the Empress. Will it matter? Kale asked. Not today, Nixera admitted. But seeds planted today may bloom in unexpected gardens tomorrow. Welcome to galactic politics, Ambassador. Where defeats can be victories just on longer timescales. The long game. 3 months later, Earth received the full text of the Outer Rim Treaty. Kale sat in his office at the Human Diplomatic Complex in Geneva, watching the news feeds explode with reactions. Protests in New Beijing. Angry demonstrations in Nova Lagos. Political speeches denouncing the Council's restrictions. He understood their frustration. He shared it. But he also saw something they didn't yet. His calm chimed. Ambassador, you have a visitor, his assistant said. She says you'll want to see her. Nixera entered his office with the same fluid grace she'd shown at the council. Her colors were shifting between blue and green, curiosity and hope if he remembered correctly. You're a long way from Solent space, Kale said, gesturing for her to sit. And you're a long way from that chamber where you spoke truth to power. She settled into a chair designed for human anatomy, adapting with remarkable flexibility. I wanted to see how Earth was handling the treaty. Badly, Kale admitted. But honestly, We're not a species that accepts limitation gracefully. Good. Nyxora's colors brightened. That's why I'm here. That speech you gave? It's spreading. Not just the official recording but discussions about it. Debates. The Shurian republics have requested educational exchanges with Earth universities. The Mythikos Collective wants to establish cultural programs. 3 minor species have quietly reached out through back channels asking about human engineering solutions to problems their own scientists couldn't solve. Kale felt something stir in his chest. The treaty forbids most of that. The treaty forbids unsupervised expansion and unrestricted technology sharing. It says nothing about education, culture, or consultation. Nyxora's colors flickered with what he'd learned was amusement. Bureaucracy creates loopholes, ambassador. I thought humans would appreciate that. Over the next hour she laid out a vision that took Kale's breath away. A network of minor species, those too small to matter to the great empires, who saw in humanity not a threat but a partner. They couldn't officially ally with Earth, that would violate the treaty. But they could share research, exchange ideas, collaborate on problems. The Varathian Empire is powerful, Nyxora explained, but empires are inherently conservative. They maintain power by maintaining status quo. Meanwhile, the galaxy's smaller players are desperate for innovation, for change, for anything that might help them survive in a system designed to keep them small. You're talking about building a coalition, Kale said. I'm talking about building a conversation. One the empires can't shut down because it's happening in the spaces between their attention. She leaned forward. That scholar, Turthanax? He published an essay 3 weeks ago titled, The Morphean Mistake. It's required reading now in 7 major academic institutions. Students across dozens of species are debating whether the Council repeated historical errors with humanity. What's the consensus? Kale asked. There isn't one. Which is perfect. Debate is what we need. Questions are what we need. The certainty of empire cracking into uncertainty, that's where change begins. A soft chime interrupted them. Kale's assistant appeared on the screen. Ambassador, urgent message from Captain Moss aboard the Perseverance. She says it's about the quantum fold research. Kale excused himself and took the call. Reyna's face appeared, barely containing excitement. We did it, she said. The calculations work. The test was successful. Reyna, slow down. What test? The quantum fold bypass. We found a way to achieve warp factor 5 without actually exceeding warp factor 3. Kale blinked. Is that even possible? It shouldn't be. But Dr. Chin had this crazy idea about folding space differently, and we tested it on a small scale and Kale, it works. We can move faster than the treaty allows without technically breaking the treaty. After the call ended, Kale returned to find Nyxora watching him with knowing eyes. Innovation, she said simply. They tried to cage it and you're already finding the gaps. We're just trying to survive, Kale said. All great movements start that way. As Nyxora prepared to leave, she paused at the door. One more thing. Scholar Turthanax sent a message for you. He said, the Morpheans tried to stop the Varathians. They failed because they taught us to be patient, to plan, to play the long game. We had 200 years to learn. You have however long it takes. Use that time wisely. After she left, Kale stood at his window, looking out at Earth's skyline. Somewhere above that sky, 17 human colonies were pushing against their boundaries in 1,000 small ways. Engineers were solving problems the Council said they couldn't solve. Artists were creating works that made alien species weep. Scientists were making breakthroughs that shouldn't be possible for a species so young. His calm chimed again. Messages from the Shurian republics, the Mythikos Collective, even a carefully worded inquiry from a faction within the Keltharn Consortium. All of them asking variations of the same question. Can we talk? The Outer Rim Treaty was supposed to silence humanity. Instead, it had given them something more valuable, legitimacy. They'd been heard at the Galactic Council. They'd made their case. They'd lost the vote but won something harder to quantify, respect from those who mattered. Kale opened a new file and began drafting a message to the President. Subject line, The Long Game, a strategic proposal. The treaty said humanity couldn't expand beyond their borders for another century. Fine. They'd use that century to build something the galaxy had never seen. Not an empire but a network. Not through conquest but through conversation. The Varathians had taught humanity patience. They were about to learn what patient humans could accomplish. And in 3,000 years, when historians look back at this moment, they might identify it as the point where the galaxy began to change. Not because an empire spoke, but because, for the first time, an empire truly listened.